Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to get started with our program. There is plenty of food, and the buffet is going to be open throughout the talk, and feel free to get up and get your dessert and coffee and tea. So we want to start and the rundown and give you the rundown and then do the introductions. So my name is Joe Pan, journalist governor of FCC. I'm the editor and producer for WWII News, a blockchain media, and I also teach part-time at Hong Kong Baptist Universities for their international journalism and master program. And it's my pleasure to have this panel, and because for the history buffs here tonight, or even if those who might not even know you love history, you're in for a treat, or a triple treat for tonight. This evening panel discussion bring together three very fascinating perspectives on Hong Kong's rich and complex past, exploring how cutting-edge technology and community engagement are reshaping the way we preserve and understand history. We're going to dive into a lot of things, including the Battle of Hong Kong, a pivotal moment in World War II that shaped the history and destiny of the city, with Dr. Kwong and his innovative digital mapping projects. We're also going to uncover some often overlooked role of the Indian community during the Japanese occupation. Going to be led and shared by Ani Mohan, who flew in from Japan to, just for this talk. And then, of course, we have Billy Pot, our very own members and experts in arts and writings and cultures, will guide us through the Hong Kong's ghost sign, preserving stories of a disappearing cultural landscape. Together, that's with all the efforts, we're going to highlight the importance and hopefully inspire you, all together we safeguard Hong Kong's heritage for the future generations. First, let me introduce the three speakers, and we will have two of them stay and talk about the projects, and then the other speakers are going to come back and finish talking about introducing the other projects, and then we're going to reconvene as a panel, do a short discussions, and open up for Q&A, and you guys probably very much look forward to asking those questions, and after you're seeing all the interesting stuff. So first, Dr. Chi-Man Kwong was born and raised in Hong Kong and completed his doctoral degree at the University of Cambridge in United Kingdom. His research interest lies in military history in East Asia with a focus on British military presence in Hong Kong. His recent projects include an interactive map detailing the Battle of Hong Kong in 1941, while utilizing technology to enhance historical understanding. Ani Mohan is a Tokyo-based tech entrepreneur representing a new breed of technologists passionate about sustainability and heritage preservation through community engagement. A Web3 specialist and blockchain technologist, which he would explain more. His current focus is uncovering the significant role of the Indian community during the Japanese occupation of, in Hong Kong during the war. And as many of you know, we at FCC will have many Indian members, some of them third generation. And so this is a very relevant and near and dear topics to our membership as well. Of course, Billy Pot is the writer and designer who was born and raised also in Hong Kong. Pot's work reflects his deep fascination in Hong Kong's cultural landscape, particularly the esoteric folk tradition, design, cultural art, and environment. Through his project, he aims to engage the community in appreciating and preserving the unique historical narrative embedded within the city's visual identity. So with that, I'm going to hand to Professor Kwong and Billy to talk about the projects, and Ani and I will be back after that. So, thank you. Make sure you have the mic because we don't have the normal mic up on that. So it's all yours.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us. I'm going to start. And,
Yes, please.
Well, our project, the project which I work on with Ben Marins over there, is called Hong Kong Ghost Signs. Yeah, I'll do this. So, first of all, for anybody who doesn't know, our project is currently being featured on the wall in the main bar downstairs. So if you've had a chance to take a look, you're going to see some familiar images tonight. But first of all, let me start by explaining what a ghost sign actually is. It's essentially a defunct sign. It doesn't have its purpose anymore. The original person who put the sign there would never have intended for it to exist in this state, in this context, in this time. We are essentially looking at a relic which shouldn't exist, and yet it does, as a piece of evidence of the past. And so when Ben and I embarked on this project about 4 years ago, our emphasis really was on the stories that these signs can tell, and they tell many different sorts. They can tell simple ones. For instance, this sign, which emerged when a seafood restaurant in Happy Valley closed, it's actually just the sales office for this building, but it's an incredibly elaborate production for something so humble. This sign had probably been covered for a good 30 years, 40 years, something like that, and it is now covered again by the signage for a Kaibo supermarket. And we may see it again in perhaps 5 or 10 years whenever Kaibo closes. We have stories of Western pop culture and how it intermingles with our own. Of course, the reach of Disney is inescapable, and we see it here even paired with clerical script for a kindergarten out by the mills. And then we have stories of neighborhoods and changing situations. We have this metal workshop in Sham Shui Po, which is now a brothel. So, things can certainly change.
Things change a lot. But by the way, that same place might have been a brothel many, many years ago during the Second World War.
Exactly, yes.
Let's talk about this later.
The more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yes.
And sometimes the stories are spectacular. This one, for example, this building will be familiar to many. It is only perhaps a 10, 15-minute walk from here at 60 Hollywood Road. That herbal tea shop is still there, and it's only the second tenant in this building, which was built in the 1920s. And sometime 2 years ago, a car actually smashed into the side of the building, knocking off a part of the facade and revealing some signage from the first tenant, which is quite possibly a bookstore that occupied the space. That bookstore was called Soiman Books. It used to sell banned texts by writers like Lu Xun and people associated with the New Culture movement. So really, this is a kind of urban archaeology that we're doing with nice emphasis on type and script and history as well. So it really reflects everything that I'm interested in. Now, our interest essentially led us to Dr. Kwong, which changed our course a bit. Would you tell us a bit about what you do?
Yes, basically, there's a story to tell here. When Billy, how did we know each other?
I believe we went on a hike.
Yes, now I remember. So that many years ago, no, not many years ago, in fact, it was 2020, or slightly before or after that. So I was invited to bring several friends to a hike. So someone told me they want to see military structures around the place. So I did. For some reason, I agreed because usually I'm very reluctant to bring people up the hills to look at military structures. But somehow I did, which I'm very glad I did because I know you. Because during the hike, you didn't speak much, if I can remember. And actually, you leave early.
Anyway, it was not because I was bored.
No, not because you said you have some sort of engagement. So you guys left early, and then we went to explore at the furthest part was actually we went to Qiu Yun Cemetery as well. And anyway, So after that, I realized, Billy, you are a designer, and then I sort of, when I was first doing the first project, which is about the Japanese invasion of Hong Kong. So that walk I agreed to take with only because I really want to see that several military structures. So I sort of tricked you guys to join me because that trip was a little bit dangerous. So that's why I needed a company. So that's why I agreed to bring you guys up. Now I can tell you. So that trip added 4 entries in that map. And then later on, you get back to me saying that you have a project about ghost signs in Hong Kong. That was the place where we sort of overlapped. Because after the walk, we didn't talk much about our projects until somehow you mentioned to me, or I mentioned to you, that I was doing a course about historical GIS in my university, in my institution. So we are basically teaching our students how to do historical maps, okay, digital historical maps, how to use GIS to tell stories. And then I think of you and your project, the Go Signs. So I sort of wanted to train our students using your gold signs. What if our students can help map all those gold signs you found, you and Ben photographed and documented in a GIS and try to create a story to a wider audience? So that's why we sort of connected. And now our project. My project is about historical geospatial data. I have been a military historian since I graduated. So like 14, 15 years, I work on different kinds of military history. For example, aerial warfare in China or naval history during the First Sino-Japanese War. But my main focus has always been Hong Kong. So we work with historical geospatial data to really augment what I have done in the past years. So many years ago, when I was trying to do military history, I focused on textual accounts. But in the past, like 5 years or so, we started to work, as 5, 6 years or so, we started to work with geographic information system as well as more historical geospatial data. So we have many different kinds of historical geospatial data. So we can sort of divide them into 3 categories. For example, historical aerial photographs, historical maps and plans, as well as many different quantitative and qualitative data from all sorts of things. So I will try to elaborate. For example, this one is a very interesting chart. But we all know Japanese occupied Hong Kong during the Second World War. But when they took the city, they actually had a very, very meticulous registration of all properties, government properties, private properties, of the so-called enemies. That means the non-neutral properties. So they actually essentially made a list, a cross-section of the entire Hong Kong's properties. So this list is interesting. It is, if I remember correctly, it is actually the houses or the properties owned by many different people. So you can see the English cursive writings. So they are the owners. The first one I think is Ili Kaduli, if I can see it. Yes. So these are the houses, the description of the houses. So we try to turn these records into features of the map. And of course, we also use other sources. For example, this one, it's a Japanese, it's a British intelligence report about the Japanese military facilities in Hong Kong. So during the war, many of people who were loyal to the Allied causes stayed behind and recorded many Japanese military intelligence and sent it back to China for the Americans or for the Chinese or Allied forces to precisely bomb them. So these are the intelligence report. So basically, they provide a very thorough view of how Hong Kong was under the Japanese. And this one is particularly interesting. It's in Hong Kong. If you are interested, you can go there and check it out. It was a thorough Japanese phone book. Everything is included, including the comfort stations, the addresses, phone number, who owns it, everything. So they are actually very thorough. But by the way, what did they mean by comfort station is very different from your understanding. If I have time, I will elaborate later. So all these Japanese-related facilities, properties, they are dutifully recorded. So what we did was to try to, and of course post-war trial records as well, they also contain rich spatial sources. And what we did is to try to use the digital method to really convert them into GIS compatible data. So far we have this workflow. It's an AI enhanced semi-automated. It's not completely AI. No, we are not overselling ourselves. So what we did is we do the OCR, of course. When we do the OCR, we employ a kind of multimodal AI to turn it into something like a structured database. So basically we ask the multimodal AI to read the page on the left and turn it into something like a Excel form, a database with columns and information organized and structured. And then what we did next is to have human intervention. We will check it by ourselves. There's only human can do it. You need contextual knowledge. You need, knowledge about Hong Kong. You need knowledge about the space of Hong Kong in order to understand all these things. And then we will use Python to assign a geo-coordinate to each location, so that they would become, they would become points and dots on the map. So basically, that's how we try to organize all these rich geodata into databases in order to tell a deeper story. So what we are trying to do is this. And then we go back to Billy's project, because this is where our projects converge, sort of, because on the one hand, we are accumulating spatial data from many generic sources about Hong Kong, things, usually you just won't spend too much time on, but when we try to place everything on a GIS so that people can have an overview of it. And then Billy's team would be going deep inside different parts and points to have an in-depth discussion.
So what we're talking about here is essentially a micro and macro scale of the same thing. What Kwong has created is actually an enormous database of knowledge. I would say that Ben and I have compiled 300 data points, and Kwong, you have compiled
14,000 so far.
Yeah, so
but it's only covered the Second World War.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a completely different order of scale. But the depth that Ben and I go into is basically supported by the fact that we have so much data from Dr. Kwong's work. But essentially, the theme going through this for both of us is that though we are couched in technology, it is actually the human at the center of it, which is the important part. And also the ways in which we research these, essentially the same. So I'll take you through this example. This is a ghost sign in Wan Chai for a fortune teller. His name is Mo Zixin. You can see his name there, and you can see that he's from Shanghai, and he's also written that he's a fortune teller. Other than that, it would be very difficult to tell anything about the man. However, I looked, and we found this ad that Mo Zixin placed in a newspaper advertising his services. We found this in CUHK's archives. He's written almost the exact same things, his name, that he's from Shanghai, and what he does. But we know it's definitely him because he writes directions to his shop, his business. He tells us his address, which matches with where he is now. He even tells us that he's above the Gulf gas. And then we found this photograph where if you look just behind the tram there, you can see Mo Zixin's sign when it was bright red and new. So what can we tell from this? Well, we can tell from the newspaper that he must have been there before 1973 because that's when the ad came out. The photograph, the person who gave it to us told us that it was taken maybe around 1972. But we also use the various preoccupations of Hong Kong to help us as well. We're very fortunate because the things that we care about here are business and property. And so our bureaucracy meticulously records everything. And so through a simple search of, say, a Centerline website, we would get a list of how many times a building has been occupied, when the building was completed, when it got its occupation permit. We could find much else through the lands registry. We could find, a record of titles through the Hong Kong Trade Development Council if it's a business. We can find details about what that business did, where it traded, whether it still trades today. And then, of course, there's the company's registry. So, we are aided, essentially by the character of Hong Kong's culture as well in this research. And so here we are. Our work essentially dovetails on maps. And would you explain to us basically what you're doing here with this historical map and then the real terrain?
When you are talking about using all these Hong Kong government records to trace your gold signs, when we do Hong Kong history after the Second World War, there's always a problem of the lack of consistency between what happened before 1941 and what happened afterwards. There's always a huge gap there. But supposedly it shouldn't be there. So what we have been trying to do is to sort of recreate the urban environment of Hong Kong during the war in order not just to fulfill my own academic curiosity about Hong Kong's Second World War experience, but also to help people like you to really have a consistent view of the urban development of Hong Kong so that, for example, there is an older story about the sugar cane juice shop. It was something else in the 1920s. It's something else afterwards. And so on. Things are disrupted by the war and because of the war. But sometimes people just start their recordings or start their inquiry from 1945. Just like all these government depositories you just mentioned in the previous slide, those four, they usually start with 1945. When you look at Zhongyun map, they all start with 1945. What about what happened before? So what we have been trying to do is to really help mapping out the wartime space so that people can better understand what happened in between, before and afterwards. So this is a large map of Hong Kong and Pearl River Delta area. I did this part because for the Japanese, it was one single military area, which was known as the 23rd Army Area. So that was the unit that occupied Hong Kong and Canton at the same time. So the Japanese conceived this area, this piece of land, very differently from our understanding. Anyway, so next slide would be what we have been trying to do to recreate Hong Kong's urban environment. We are very, very fortunate to find many, many American aerial photographs taken during the war. This is not available in Hong Kong, not available in the UK. They know nothing about it until last year. We know nothing about it until last year. We are very, very fortunate. And by the way, today, 80 years ago today, the US Third Fleet bombed Hong Kong. It was the largest air raid against Hong Kong during the Second World War. 470 planes participated. So it was a hot day. Yeah, and it was actually quite a good day for Hong Kong because all the people in Hong Kong looked at all the Japanese ships in the middle of Victoria Harbour being bombed and sunk. So from that day on, yay. In fact, one of the Jesuits' fathers left a long account of how his students at WWII school looked at the scene and cheered during the bombing.
And interestingly, the 2 floors above the bookshop where we recorded that sign, that is the original site of WWII College.
See, all these connections and so on. Yeah. All these connections, really?
Yeah, really.
I didn't realize. I didn't realize myself.
If you look on WWII's website, they have a timeline of their history.
So you have a short period when they were there.
There's a very short period when they were there.
Thing is, at those vantage points, you can see Victoria Harbour, but maybe earlier then. So all these photos allow us to really, what we did was to use a very, very low-tech method called a georeferencing. So we work with Geographic Information System. Our software is called ArcGIS. We use the scan of all these aerial photos to place them on the GIS. So what you see are the mosaic of many, many layers of aerial photos. Of course, they can be seen differently, okay? They can be seen by different dates or by different missions and so on. We will talk about those later. And for the next slide would be Yes. Remember the features we talked about? All these entries in phone books, in the who's who, or in the newspapers, and so on. So with the combination of these different geographic information, we can finally have a new way of reapproaching this period. I wrote books about this period, the Japanese occupation, 10 years ago, without the precise knowledge of where all these things happened. Now, if I reapproach the whole episode with more geographic knowledge, it feels so differently. Yeah, it really feels so differently. For example, you all know Blue Pool Road, Nam Tong Do. There was a massacre of Chinese civilians when the Japanese attacked Hong Kong during the Battle of Hong Kong in December 1941. When I wrote about it 10 years ago, I didn't really know where actually that took place. Well, I have a very vague understanding, but you all know Blue Pool Road was long, right? So, but when I look at the aerial photos, the first time I look at the aerial photos, I tried to find the house where I believe that happened. It was a flat land, nothing was there. And I was like, oh God, I didn't realize where exactly it happened. So I have to check out all these papers again and again in order to dig out where exactly that happened. It was so far away from what I originally believed. So what I'm trying to say is, that's exactly the advantage of combining detailed study of a certain place through the traces of the past. It really humbles me as a historian because I usually work with text. That means I work with lots of ambiguity. I admit, when I was not very sure, well, you just fudge a bit. You use your imagination. But when you work with historical GIS, you can't really do that. Or it makes it very difficult. It really humbles you to rethink. It challenges your so-called judgment. So that's where I really think the method is good, and that's why Billy's approach of really creating certain points in depth would be essential.
Yes, and the other thing which we can agree with using maps in understanding this is you begin to see relationships between events
Yes.
Through different times, through different spaces, and how they interact with one another much more easily than when interpreting text. Like visualizing like this is incredibly helpful.
Just for an example, you see the blue dots? By the way, look at that picture first.
Yes.
Yeah, let's
Okay.
go first.
And also, it's really, we're talking about places that we all know today.
Yes.
And it really just kind of grounds it and makes it real. So take a look at this aerial photo. Have a look at this and think about it.
Anyone can recognize where it is.
It's where we are sitting right now. That is the building we are sitting in as we speak. And if you look at the way the roads are organized and the way the blocks are organized, it's essentially the same. Very little has actually changed. It's just layers and layers and layers of redevelopment and layers of time.
Yeah.
But we can still understand these events far better.
So Hong Kong is really a very ideal place to do this kind of so-called, if I'm allowed to say archaeology. I'm not an archaeologist. I'm an academically trained military historian. So if there's an archaeologist here, I accept my apologies, okay? So it really allows us to really go layer by layer, peeling off layers and layers of information in order to know about the changes of a certain point. That photo, the one you previously seen, it was taken on, I think, on early February 1945, when the Japanese were still in Hong Kong. If you look closer through our system, which I will share with you guys later, you will notice one thing. When you look closely at all these aerial photos of Hong Kong taken during the Japanese occupation, there are almost no people on the streets, no cars on the streets, and so on. So it's a really interesting site. So we can move on.
And perhaps, okay, great.
Yeah.
And here we go. So to illustrate our point about finding relationships, where relationships couldn't be seen before, So this is Dr. Kwong's map, and you are mapping.
This is 1963 Hong Kong. We are using the Development Bureau's aerial photograph. So they had a depot. Interesting thing about Hong Kong's aerial photography is that last year was the centenary of aerial photography of Hong Kong. So the first layer is like doing scans of your body, like every several years. Okay, if you can afford it, or I mean, in terms of your physical fitness. So layers and layers of aerial photographs can be seen. Okay, the first one was taken in 1942 at 24. The second one is 1930, and then there's a huge gap in the government's depository. The next layer would be 1945 after the war. So what we did was to plug the gap by adding the wartime photos. But this one, 1963 version, is actually very, very important in our study because it is the best quality, is in the best quality. It's 1 to around 1,000. You can actually see people on the streets if you look close enough or zoom in close enough.
Well, this is actually the amusing thing about us talking about technology here. Very little of what we're using is cutting-edge technology.
Oh, yes.
This aerial photography and like the lenses used to capture these incredibly sharp images where in some cases what we can see the tops of people's heads.
Yeah,
Like, it was
60-something years old.
it was perfected a long time ago, but that's what we're relying on. But what's mapped here, all these orange dots, it essentially shows us the pattern of post-war industrialization and development.
Urban developments. And so all these are basically about where you can see most urban activities.
So remember that pattern, and this is the map that Ben and I put together, mapping all of our ghost signs at that point. And you can see that the highest concentrations of ghost signs matches exactly with the highest concentrations of urban development. Makes sense.
These dots, the dots in my system are those about the Second World War. And the dots here in Billy's map are mostly the signs that were produced shortly after the war. So we are actually chronicling two phases of urbanization in Hong Kong. What I did was to chronicle the one that took place from the early 20th century to the Second World War, and Billy actually recorded what happened afterwards, but also your period, the period between 50s or to the 90s, was actually being swallowed by current development. Things change so fast. In these parts of Kowloon, you witness 3 redevelopments, or even 4, or even more. So it's really good to have all these relics, unintended relics, okay, that can be found.
And from this, we could basically agree, like, okay, this is a very interesting, unusual chronicle of post-war Hong Kong between the 1945 and 1980s.
And speaking of brothel, look at Sham Shui Po. You can see there's a high concentration of the old part of Sham Shui Po and the new part of Sham Shui Po, because that part of Sham Shui Po was not reclaimed yet. Back then, most of it was still part of the sea. Yeah. While the urban space changed a lot, some of the basic functions or the outlook or the vibe of the community did not change. The reason you have brothels in that area, it was a very densely populated working class neighborhood. Back then, it was actually the same. Even after the redevelopment, things did not change much. The social fabric was still there. So all these records are actually very important for us to understand the consistency as well as the differences that took place during in between.
So now we've done the macro. Let's do a deep dive into the micro, which is ghost signs. Now, the comment that Dr. Kwong left me with was, essentially, it's a very privileged thing to leave a record of yourself in history. Most people do not. Most people just disappear. But ordinary lives are not, they're not insignificant, they're important too. And we often lose information because they're not recorded. And so this record, which Ben and I have made, is an inadvertent record of very ordinary activities and very ordinary lives, something which normally wouldn't be we wouldn't have information about.
Yeah.
And so here's one example of the kind of detail that we can get by looking at these signs. In the past, signs were, of course, hand-painted, and quite often they were done by calligraphers. And these calligraphers would operate on tables like that one on the right. That man would just set up a table, and he would write signs for the entire neighborhood. So it's quite likely that many neighborhoods at that time would have been defined by the handwriting of 2, perhaps 3 men. And we still have this practice today, and we can still find, in some cases, the identities precisely of these people because they signed their work. So if you look at the top left corner, there is a sign for an auto glass shop, and the sign painter has signed it. His name is Cho Wa-on. That sign is in Tai Hang, but actually Cho Wa-on was very active in Kwun Tong. That's where you find a lot of his signs, or that's where you used to find a lot of his signs until Yuman Square was redeveloped. And actually somebody called the phone number on the sign to check if he was around, and they actually managed to get in touch with his daughter-in-law, who was able to tell him about who Cho Wa-on was and what he was like and how he did these signs. So it's really quite remarkable, just information that you wouldn't get. And this is a sign writing stall which existed on Argyle Street until very recently. I think it was cleared around the time of the pandemic. So this kind of activity went on until very recently. There are still some sign painters around, but they're a bit more obscure. Here's one sign painter actually making a sign for my company, and he's turned them into zinc stencils. And then, of course, this sign painting and advertising, it takes in all these industries which Hong Kong is very much known for, and they play a role too. And so in this case, we have some instances of signs and adverts which are illustrated. They're quite rare in Hong Kong because they involve more effort and they're quite costly. But when they were done by the kind of person that you see on the right there. This man's name is Jimmy Keung. Jimmy is still actually relatively young because when he was a very young boy, maybe 13 or 14 years old, he went to work as an apprentice as a billboard painter because right up until the 90s in Hong Kong, all the cinema billboards used to be painted by hand by people like this. They used to do it panel by panel, and
the quality varied.
The quality varied, but Jimmy is very good. Jimmy is a very good one, actually through Jimmy we were able to get in touch with others like him, and through Margaret and Henry here we were actually able to get in touch by coincidence with Jimmy's senior apprentice brother, and this really touches all sorts of sectors of Hong Kong and all parts of history, such that you would not imagine. So actually Jimmy's elder apprentice, he went on to make sets for television, and then from there he started to make sets for music videos. So another part of Hong Kong's history and culture which has a disproportionately large cultural impact on the world, and that's cantopop. So that's where signage and cantopop intersect. And the same man became so skilled with this that in the end, come 1997, there had to be a backdrop made for the handover ceremony. They couldn't find anybody to do it. Nobody was willing to take on this challenging job because they would actually need to switch the setting within a 6-hour period from the British to the Chinese. And so finally they got to Jimmy's apprentice brother, Mr. Ko, who was the only person who was willing to do it. And in this way, he did it for both the British and the Chinese side. And the way he did it was actually quite genius. He built the Chinese sign first, the Chinese backdrop first, and then he built the British one around it. And so they finished the ceremony, and as soon as they finished, he dropped the British side and it revealed the Chinese one inside.
Wow, it's very metaphorical. For some people, maybe.
So, like, ghost signs, they seem trivial, but actually they take in all these people who are significant. And then, of course, we have, a record of rarely seen and unusual calligraphic scripts. So this man, young guy, if anybody here has seen a truck, and you all have, with Chinese writing on the side, it's quite likely that you have seen the calligraphy of Yuan Gai, because he does every single truck in Hong Kong. Why, you might ask? Because he is one of the few people left who is very good at doing a kind of calligraphic script called Bucknai, Beiwei script. Very few people do it because it takes about 30 years of mastery before people are willing to pick this script up. It's so difficult. But it was very popular in Hong Kong right up until the 90s because it is very charismatic and very vibrant, and that's what people want for a business. So this is what trucks want. And in addition to this, Yuan Gai is very good with paint. He knows exactly what kind of paint mixture will go on the truck and won't fade from the sun, and he can work quickly. So he can have the whole thing prepared, he can do the stencils, and then he can have the truck done, and the truck will be back making money for the owner within an hour. And also, inadvertently, Yang Sifu has made an extensive catalog of all his calligraphy just by virtue of scanning his work to make his stencils. He did this quite by accident, and I really hope that computer's safe.
Did you make a backup?
That's not my particular job. That's Ken and Kevin's job at Street Sign HK. So this is an example of Bucknai,
Yes.
Bucknai Tai. This is a barber shop in Causeway Bay, and Hollywood barbershop. And you can't see the sign anymore. It's been covered over. Now it's a dog groomer. So it went from cutting human hair to cutting dog's hair.
Consistencies. We talk about consistencies, isn't it?
So there are many parallels in history. And then, of course,
I'm sorry about that. Sorry.
Of course, our paths and our research dovetailed once more. So, Dr. Kwong, why don't you tell us where we are here?
Yeah, I'm sorry for that embarrassing photo. I promise I won't do that again. Ben, you made me do this. I can still remember you said do some pose. I was like, what? Because I have been to that place for like 300 times and for study or whatever. So this was at Shengmun Redoubt. I think some of you probably have been there. It was one of the British military structures you can find in Hong Kong's country parks. So to prepare for the Japanese invasion, during the 1930s, the British built many of these kind of structures in different parts of the city, especially in the countryside, of course, and of course surrounding Hong Kong Island, and also inside the mountains of Hong Kong Island and parts of Kowloon as well. So I was there because of what was engraved above my head, because, well, now I know Billy. Back then, I knew Billy and Ben were hunting for signs. So in a conversation, I sort of suggested, yeah, I know of a sign. I want to know a bit more about that sign, the fonts of the sign, because I was very familiar with the place, but there is one question I can never answer. Do I need a designer to answer me, which was the fonts being used for that sign. It was clearly built, we know when it was built. It was built in 1940. It was built in between 1938 to 1940. But the sign looks so much like, what? Transport fonts?
Well, it looks like,
Ministry.
from what we understood, it looked like a font called Ministry.
Yes,
Which
Ministry.
was being used on British highways.
Yes. So it was a very British font, a very modern looking, and I just find it very fascinating. And I want to know exactly what font was being used, because I was writing the historical interpretation panel for AFCD, Agriculture and Fisheries Department. So now you have a historical explanation panel next to this structure telling people what they are. So the next would be all these signs. So you can see, because the British named the structure according to London street map, because the layout of the structure called Shengmun Redoubt really resembles the central London. Yeah, so they named
I
it
think
afterwards.
they must have had a bit of a sense of humor, because it really would not have been pleasant in there. But they've chosen all the ritziest neighborhoods and
Yes.
nicest streets.
The strand.
They and they named the control center the Strand Palace Hotel.
Which has a toilet, though. But it
Yes.
has a toilet.
Luxurious.
Yeah, Shaftesbury Avenue.
So this is another example of sort of like a nice sort of. It's almost like traveling through a wormhole in space. You know, all of a sudden you're transported to London, but you're actually in the middle of Xingmun.
But that's the kind of Hong Kong we want to know more. On the one hand, I look at the official records, all these official things, but on the other hand, you have all these small details which leads to big stories.
And how's
Yeah,
this for
okay.
time travel?
Yeah.
So on the right, you see what the entrance to the Strand Palace Hotel looks like today. You can see the sign that says Strand Palace Hotel right on the inside of the entrance on the right. And then there's also a sign at the top, I think it says Regent Street. But have a look at this. This is the exact same structure when it was brand new. Standing sort of around
Indian
where we were
soldiers.
standing.
Yeah, the Indian soldiers of who. This particular unit was probably did not participate because it was transferred before the war, if I remember correctly. But lots of Indian soldiers, which and Ani will talk about later, took place, fought in the Battle of Hong Kong, and they settled in Hong Kong. Some of them just like policemen, etc., etc. And so, you on the one hand you have the place, you have all these relics, and on the other hand you have all these stories and so on. So we really need to, I don't know what to say, to digitally create them on the one hand, and on the other hand try to preserve them in ways that people can relate to, rather than just write long books which my students now refuse to read. Yeah.
Yeah, but just check it out. Like all those signs are still visible today.
Yes.
You can see it on the left and you can see it on the right. So many connections to everywhere. Connections like with engineers in the UK. Connections with like the Indian community.
The British Empire and
British
so
Empire.
on. And by the way, the structure was built by Chinese labor. Yes, we built it.
And then we can document societal change, policy change, government change. Here we have a gigantic ad for cigarettes out in Aberdeen. I just learned that possibly that's because there was a gigantic British-American tobacco factory in the same neighborhood. And this is Leung Yao, Good Companion, a BAT brand. And this is one instance in which Ben and I have actually celebrated a person who has destroyed all these signs, because the signs that she destroyed was tobacco advertising. So this person on the right here is Dr. Judith Mackay, who is an anti-tobacco lobbyist and an advisor to the World Health Organization. So she actually ended tobacco advertising in Hong Kong. But what she inadvertently created as well through her work was a gigantic record of ghost signs which she eradicated. When we went to her house, Ben and I, Dr. Mackay brought out a 4 terabyte hard drive and opened it up for us and showed us every single tobacco sign which she documented, basically like a hitman, to target it and destroy it. But what she also created for us was a guide to go out and find any of these buildings which still existed, and very likely we could find that old tobacco ad still just under the paint, which is what we did. So we drove down the road to Sai Kung Town, where they used to have all of these tobacco signs, and we actually can see, if you look closely at the very same buildings which we photographed there. So that's 1986 at the top and 2024 at the bottom. If you look,
still see the words.
yeah, you can still see some of it. You can see the red of the Winston sign underneath the white paint, and if you go up close to the building at the end, you can still see the blue of the Good Companion sign, and it's particularly sinister if you realize that it's right next to a basketball court and a playground.
I'm going to. I should map all these. I should map all her hunts.
Well, we should, we
really.
should.
Yes.
And then we can look at gentrification as well. This is Tai Hang, a neighborhood which is known for garages, a working class neighborhood. And these two gents clearly are not working class, nor is the bar. or the coffee shop, which is opened on the ground floor. But if you look just above Buddy, you'll see a very crude sign, which is for an automotive bodyworks shop, which is, of course, no longer there, but it used to occupy that space. A very nice little record of the way that that neighborhood is going. And then, of course, we have changes in government structure. So anybody here who remembers the Urban Council will remember how ubiquitous its flower mark was, because the Urban Council did everything. It ran beaches, it ran rubbish disposal, in this case, a car park. The Urban Council is the reason why Hong Kong has its own Olympic team. And once in a while, you will find the Urban Council's mark here and there, like in this rubbish collection depot in Quarry Bay. You can still see it hanging on. And as a little side note, it's also a bit of an exploration into Hong Kong's design history, because this mark actually involved several prominent designers. It evolved out of an armorial badge, which was awarded to Hong Kong. The original armorial badge was designed at the College of Arms in London. I found out all about this simply by calling the College of Arms on the phone, and they picked up, and then the lady, I didn't expect it to be like this. The lady there said, "Oh yes, Dominic can tell you." And then she put the phone down and said, "Dominic, can you come over? There's a man from Hong Kong who wants to know about the Urban Council."
He has the story ready all the time.
And-
He's
and-
waiting for you.
And he came over and just told me when they awarded it. But it did not look anything like this modernist mark. It took a designer on the left, Rebecca Lee, who is also an esteemed member of this club, to create this modernist mark, which was seen everywhere in Hong Kong. So much so that people would sometimes mistake it for the flag of Hong Kong. And the interesting parallel there is that it's not just any flower, it's actually a bauhinia. So the connection to modern-day Hong Kong and the modern flag of the Hong Kong SAR is definitely there. This isn't the only designer that was connected with it. The first designer who came to modernize this armorial badge, which you see down at the bottom, is Kan Tai Keung. So he was the person who took the first stab at modernizing this. So he comes into the story as well. And then as a side note, since we're talking about design, and since we have him here today, we also find ghost signs connected with Henry Steiner. So this sign, which we found right next to the gigantic Good Companion sign in Aberdeen, is the old dairy farm logo. And the old dairy farm logo was changed and replaced by the one which we all know and love today, the one which Henry designed. So what we're looking at there is one old dairy farm mark, which they missed, which still sort of lingers to this day on the side of this ice production factory in Aberdeen. Quite remarkable. So basically, where does this go in terms of technology? And here is where we converge once again.
Yes.
With the work of Dr. Kwong. And now, with your support and help, and also with our very wonderful designer, Mart, who is with us over there today. Mart, will you? We are also developing our interactive map, mapping all the ghost signs of Hong Kong, all the ones that we've seen. But of course, we are just two people. So we very much want to make it open source. It's interactive. We are making it so that people can join and sign up for free, and they can see.
Oh God, I love your design.
And they can see where every single sign is. They can go visit it, and if they find a new one of their own, they can document it. They can write down all the information. They can report on the status of a sign if we spotted one, but it's not there anymore. They can say it's gone missing. Here is how it would look with your own user profile. This is how it would look when you're sort of inputting data, and the data set that we have is just beautiful. Considering everything which you've just heard me talking about, that's what we have in an Excel spreadsheet, and that's everything that's going to go into this app. So it's every single sign has a story.
Promise me, don't create an account for me and make that photo in the profile picture. Promise me.
I cannot promise you.
Don't do that, okay?
Who knows where it'll go in the future. This is a functionality which Mart very enthusiastically proposed. We don't have funding for it yet, but essentially it is an AI-generated walking tour. You can input whatever it is you want to see of these ghost signs, and the AI will generate a walking tour for you to see them all. Who knows who will fund this, but there you go. And
So can I show the map as
Yes, of
well?
course, yes.
Yes, how do I do that? Can we get back to
Let me do this.
the other tab? Oh, thank you. So the relationship between Billy's project and our GIS work is this. We have been trying to create history using GIS, and we sort of supported Billy's work by basically introducing our workflow to Billy's and Ben, and later Marty. So this is what we did, the Second World War project. We showed you guys I can't see my own cursor though. Oh, it's big. This is our interactive map. We try to tell the story through GIS by including all these different data about Japanese occupation of Hong Kong and put them on the GIS. Oh, sorry, I'm not very used to this computer. And we put it in a 3D GIS, and we georeferenced all these aerial photos taken by the Americans during the Second World War. And we try to include everything we can find on the map. So basically, it just works like what Marty are thinking to do. So later on, just imagine we can create a story of certain person who lived in certain parts of Hong Kong during the Second World War. I'll just give you an example. Remember I mentioned the comfort stations, right? When I was doing oral history with an old man who was 94, when he was 14, he worked at the naval dockyard. I'm sorry about this. It's kind of. He was working at the naval dockyard. He lived at Barrington, so near the BAT factory at Causeway Bay. So every day he had to walk from Causeway Bay through Wan Chai to the Admiralty, where the Royal Naval Dockyard was located. So he was an engineer in the later part of his life. He was a very successful engineer. So he reads map, he can understand map. So I used the same system to do oral history with him. So let's look at the map, and can you describe with me what did you see when you walk along the way to work? So just exactly like what you guys are proposing to do, to just try to combine the walking experience with all this granularity of data. And he remembered only one thing. He said he saw a very peculiar shop with a very strange name called My Wife. So literally translated as My Wife, okay? Chai. My Wife was actually a Japanese name. It was a Japanese name, but it named it differently, okay? It was literally translated as My Wife, but in fact it was not. It was just an ordinary Japanese name. Then in my database, that was actually a comfort station in Wan Chai for the Japanese Navy. So I asked him to describe further. Can you still remember anything related to that My Wife shop? He said it was in the middle of a crossroad. So in fact, in my database, it was there, exactly there, in the green dots, one of the green dots. I can't see the words, it was so far away from me. So one of those from the Japanese phone book was actually the comfort station with the name so-called Chai, My Wife. Okay, but in Japanese it read differently, of course, but I forgot the name. But it was on the map. I can't see it now. Anyway, so just imagine if people can use it for similar endeavor. Try to recall memory using this, or try to experience history or experience culture or the deep layers of Hong Kong culture through the GIS system. So that's why our work sort of combined it together. And yeah, I look forward to see the GoSign app. And in fact, I just promised Ben and Marty, I said I would force all my students to download the app, use the app for my spatial history class because they need to see how deep curation combined with all these digital methods and the data we have. So that's basically what we will try to do in the future as well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
So that's the end of our presentation. Oh, and they are available at the 2 QR codes here. Billy, where is the QR code? Yes, sorry. So you can, they are readily available. So you can take a picture, scan the QR code later. It works well on phone, iPad, PC, whatever machines you like, of course. Thank you.
Thank you.
We see each other again during the panel.
So we, both gentlemen, big hands of applause for the two speakers, and they will be back to answer more questions. So earlier, while they're setting up, I'm going to kind of give you the anecdote. So earlier, I was talking to a guest and said, well, the first presentation is going to be an hour. And say, wow, really that long? And I said, believe me, if you start getting into it, it will flew by, and it actually flew by so fast, and we wanted more, right? And so there's so much to unpack, and there's so much overlap, including what we're about to share. And I'm going to go ahead and start a more of a little conversation, but first tell us why are you here and interested in this? And so a little bit background, I actually met Ani at a Web3 conference here in Hong Kong. He came in and talked about how he crowdsourced and how his platform actually want to crowdsource and help preserve various pieces of history and preservation, and I thought that will be interesting. But given the topic, right, Hong Kong under the Japanese occupation, how weird it would be if he's actually a Japanese, but he's actually a Japanese, but Indian Japanese and born in Japan. So that kind of started the conversation we had. And so let's start with that. Why this interests you?
皆さんこんばんは。今日は日本語で大丈夫でしょうか？
Well, I obviously don't understand, but it's good that someone else does. Actually, there was another colleague of his flew in from Taiwan who speaks Japanese. But that said, go ahead, please.
Just thought I'd break the ice. But yes, I am not Japanese actually by passport or by face. But I am born and raised in Japan. And this actually really relates to why I personally chose this topic. And I must say, after listening to Billy and Dr. Kwong, I am no expert in this field. I am just a person with a very heavy interest in different cultures, in third cultures, mixing of cultures. And this topic of Indian heritage being so deeply ingrained in Hong Kong's history and culture was really fascinating for me because I thought I was the only one in East Asia, and turns out it's not at all. So that's why I told Joe, I would love to cover this topic. No, I'm not a PhD or doctorate in history, but I am deeply interested in, and I will touch upon why this interest grew upon me as well. But just to start off, these pictures that's on the screen is very fascinating to me because it really showed me that the Indians it was not just people living in Hong Kong, but they were part of Hong Kong's infrastructural society. And the photos that you see here, and before I begin, because I was very surprised, when I first found out about the history and heritage of Indian culture in Hong Kong, and specifically the Indian police force in Hong Kong, I would just love to see a show of hands on how many of the people here tonight, and I know Dr. Kwong, I'm not expecting you to raise your hand because you're an expert in this field, but the others, how many are aware of the number of Indians involved in Hong Kong's police and military forces during the war? That's amazing. So it just goes to show how well known it is and how it's probably just a part of normal history for you all who are from Hong Kong. But for a foreigner like me, it was news. And it was extremely fascinating to start this journey of understanding how this entire culture just started off, and where it kind of led to. So just to kind of begin. So again, a set of photos, which is extremely fascinating. We can see Sikh police officers around the 1940s. There's photos from the 1940s marching on the streets of Hong Kong. While on the right, and this is also a very interesting piece of history for me, which I learned recently, was that even pre-war, obviously through the British, there was a huge influx of Indian personnel into Hong Kong as well. But the photo on the right is from the 1920s, actually. We can see Indian, again, police officers were, I guess, disciplining a couple of locals. We don't know what they did, unfortunately. But so I will touch upon why I'm interested in this, and I think it's very important for me to explain the background on what got me into this journey to begin with. And so I myself, we need Hugo. The irony that the technology doesn't work for the technologists. But so just a quick background on why I'm doing this, and what kind of gave me the guts to have the honor to share the stage with experts, with the likes of Dr. Kwong and Billy, to still come up here and explore this topic. Is so as Joe rightly explained, I originally, so the history actually starts with my grandparents, and you can see a lovely photo of my South Indian raised grandparents over here. They're both no more, but there's a huge chunk of history that I learned from them. And this is because my late grandfather was part of the Indian Foreign Service, of course, during the British occupation of India as well. And he went through the majority of his career. He spent a lot of time in the Persian Gulf, in a lot of Soviet states, including Soviet Russia, as well as Bulgaria, and a lot of their Middle East as well, US, and finally back in India. But a lot of my childhood, especially when I would visit them in India, was spent with me hearing stories from my grandparents on all the different things that took place in their lives, in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and them as simple Indians as part of the Foreign Service living in all these different places. So it was a very fascinating time for me. Obviously, there were phases for me where, as just a grandchild, when you're too young, you're not very interested. You're just kind of like, okay, grandpa's going off again, talking about something. Okay, when am I going to get my snacks? But it's only later, unfortunately, that I realized the true value that all his stories had. And luckily for me, he left a memoir. He left four sets of memoirs depicting his time as a diplomat in the Foreign Service. So this is kind of where my interest in cultural heritage and preservation of cultural heritage begins. And there's a final piece to the puzzle on why I kind of, what mobilized me into getting into this. But I'll share that at the end. I think it's a good wrap up. But fast forward, what got me to Japan, my parents, they were part of the the IT boom, IT industry. And I think because of my grandparents who were essentially very motivating to leave your nest and explore new parts of the world, I believe my parents, while majority of people from India at the time were typically going towards the UK or the US, where the English is the main language, they already had this instilled in them to explore new regions, and they decided to just go off to Japan. They had an opportunity to go to Japan. They were like, yeah, learning a new language isn't a big deal. We can manage that, so why not do that? So they came over to Japan, and obviously they had me, and that's how I ended up in Japan as
And
well.
your parent, you told me your dad was born where?
He was born in Soviet Russia. Yeah, so it's very interesting because I don't think there's a lot of people, especially in my, I come from a very relatively traditional South Indian family, and I don't think there's a lot of people around you who gets to say that, who at least hear stories where your traditional South Indian grandparents are saying, yeah, there was a time when we used to speak Russian, Arabic, Bulgarian. I guess they had a separation of languages back then, but all these variety of languages, and my grandparents took a huge pride in getting into these cultures.
So, and the grandparent, and you also talk about part of the archives where the flood happens, and so I think there is overlap on earlier the speakers talk about how you actually preserve those memories.
Yeah, so this kind of relates to what I'll touch up at the end on why, I'm a technologist by training. I am my day job. This is purely a passion for me. Trying to uncover more of history, understand more of the background history, not just what we learn, through textbooks in school. Because to be honest, I had never learned that the significance that Indian heritage has in Hong Kong. And I took world history. I actually come from an American education system, and I know where we are right now, what's putting a roof above our head, but to be quite honest, it didn't cover much. And I took AP World History, for anyone who knows AP World History. Nothing. So nothing, no talk on the Indian heritage in Hong Kong when I frankly believe it should have been. It should have been part of the whole story and narrative on the British Empire, the wars that took place in East Asia, when the Japanese, Dr. Kwong and Billy touched upon a lot about the Japanese occupation. When the Japanese were coming into Hong Kong, who were there protecting Hong Kong, right? So none of this was taught to me. So just kind of going back, I'm a technologist by training, and my day job is, as Joe explained, I had a team in a blockchain-based company, and our product is to do with a lot about photography and crowdsourcing of photographs. And we have an aspect where we're gamifying it, and then we have another aspect where we're building a database on it. And I'll just touch upon this a bit later, including the flood story, because I want to end it with that, because it's a bit of a touching story. So just a bit of background on my day job. Who am I and why am I here? So as Joe said, we originally met at a Web3 event, and I had one of the global business teams for a blockchain company in Japan, which incidentally, the parent company is a publicly listed company in Japan. So very, very legitimate blockchain company, which I know is not, you don't see a lot of. I think when you hear a lot about crypto and blockchain, half of it is quite shady, but just to let everyone know, we're extremely legitimate, and we're here to do good work, or hopefully good work, and relevant work. Oh, it's going a bit back. All right, so now I wanted to learn a bit more about this heritage and what's going on, and unfortunately, we didn't get the time. I didn't get the time to pick Dr. Kwong's brains before this session. And Dr. Kwong, I must apologize in advance because I think I'm going to be picking your brains quite a bit after this talk, especially hearing your talk as well. But I had the opportunity to learn about a lot of the legacy families in Hong Kong. I also visited the CLP Pulse, the Hong Kong Heritage Project as well. And it was very fascinating to see that a lot of the archives kept there come directly from some of the prominent families here in Hong Kong. And it's all so well preserved to the point where you can trace back how, for example, how even the CLP, for example, started, and the heritage behind the building and so on. And apparently, and I just learned this, and I'm sure a lot of you are aware, but one of the Kaduri family, obviously were associated with the CLP. It started off by them clearing their archives, their family home archives, and they found a bunch of letters, which I think their ancestors or their fathers or grandfathers had been writing to, you know, different people, and realized that all of this have extremely, it's extremely valuable in terms of heritage preservation, cultural preservation, and just historic knowledge. And that's pretty much how the whole idea behind the museum begun. And I was very surprised to hear this because I personally, you know, as I mentioned, had a relatable anecdote, although we're not a legacy family, or, you know, I'm not putting myself on par with the Kaduris, but, you know, everyone has an attic. Everyone has grandparents who have very valuable stories to share. And I thought it was very nice in a sense of, you know, obviously preserving all this culture, that they took the initiative to really do something about it and share the knowledge with everyone, and with folks like myself who are really interested and keen on learning about this. And it was a very humbling experience to visit these places and, you know, truly hear about it, read about it, and understand about it. And what I came to know is, as I mentioned, a lot of the prominent families obviously have a lot of their historic records there. But what about all the others? What about all the others who's, you know, pictures who I started off the slides with? Do we know about them? They must have families. They must have, you know, successors in their families. There must be some people knowing something about what happened to these people. But so more often than not, it's very difficult for us to gain access to that information. And unfortunately, a lot of historic archives get lost. And I think that's why, especially, for example, with Billy and Dr. Kwong's work, it holds so much more significance that there are people working to uncover these missing portions of our past that we should all definitely be aware of and be a part of. But, you know, unless some people work on it or act on it or preserve it actively, it's very difficult for us to gain the knowledge of that and pass it over to future generations. And this is why I was very touched when I was able to visit, thanks to Joe actually, the Heritage Project, and read all these files of not just the families who are listed here, but even of other prominent families, you know, Indian origin families who flew in from Shanghai pre-war, and, you know, what their life was like. And somehow they managed to interview the heads of the families who are quite old, but somehow they managed to interview them, and it was a very interesting experience to actually learn about that. Anyone knows who WWII is? Okay, we got one person here. So this is an interesting story. Do you want to tell the story, or should I tell the story? Of course. Secret agent. Lovely. So WWII was a secret agent with the KMT, and there's a very interesting story about, again, the Indians and how dedicated they were to their jobs and how focused they were. Now, apparently, so WWII had a huge network of agents across the continent. And there's a time when the Japanese, I believe, started occupying. He obviously, you know, you're commissioning all your agents in your network to go gather information, you know, spread the news, get more information, find out what's going on, all of this. And apparently, some of his agents, there was a checkpoint, and obviously the Chinese side of people obviously know who they are, and, you know, they kind of understand what's going on. And obviously, you know, people aren't really pro-Japanese invasion, so apparently there was a checkpoint, and these agents were trying to get through, and the local Chinese officers were telling them, and they were both local Chinese officers as well as the Indian officers, and apparently the Chinese officers were like, yeah, just let them go, you know, they can pass, like, you know, everyone knows what they're up to. But apparently the Indian officers were so dedicated to their jobs that they insisted that they conduct all the checks, all the necessary procedures, that they go through all the frisk and search, which I thought was a very fascinating story, that despite all the different, despite the political landscape changing, societal landscape changing, and even when I was researching a lot about the Indian police force, they were obviously known for their dedication and their commitment a lot, to the point where even spy agents had a tough time. And I just thought it was a very interesting snippet, which touches upon just the sheer dedication and commitment that some of these people had. And as an outsider, it's very interesting, because you'd think that these are people who are extremely, they don't take any sides, because technically even the British Empire is not theirs. And then they're stationed in a completely different country, and they have no commitment to any of these people, but these were such quality resources, and I guess this explains why they were treasured even between the British administration.
And just to add to that story, to that point, the spy crossing were ultimately caught by the Japanese, right? And the Japanese were able to get very much vital information that almost unraveled the entire spy network that Dai Li has set up during the occupation time. Not only in Hong Kong, they were affected by the whole southern China. And Dai Li was furious, and he almost executed the station head of that, responsible for that particular unit. And he revamped the entire code of travel. So from then on, no spy can even exit or go outside of the home without authorizations, without a certain protocol. But that particular incident kind of revolutionized the entire spy network protocol as well. And that traced back to one Indian police doing his job and at that checkpoint. And so that was very interesting. You led to that. And so anyway, going back, continue.
I guess in hindsight, it didn't really help their case, but again, an interesting anecdote to touch upon on their dedication and commitment to their roles, whatever they're given. So again, why am I talking about all of this? I think that's why we're here. And I mentioned earlier that I personally am on this journey to find out what happened to them. And of course, talking to Dr. Kwong, talking to Billy, participating in the Ghost Map project, these are all fantastic ways that maybe it gives us a bit more hints on a little bit of our history. But unfortunately, not everyone has access to that. Not everyone has access to a special entry into the museum, thanks to Joe, that I had. And I want to somehow connect the technologies that I am working with, just like our previous speakers are doing, to see how we can better source all of these different information that all of these different people hold. And how do we open that up again to the vaster community, to pretty much everyone in the world? And I think that's where my day job now comes in. So far I've been talking about my passion side, but this is where my day job comes in. And what we do here is we have essentially products relating to photography. And we are crowdsourcing photographs which can be taken by anyone. And one is we have a very simple game app, but the main aspect to it is we're building a database of unprocessed photographs. And we can prove what time and where someone took these photos. So what this means is, going forward, if someone finds something in their attic, or let's say someone's grandparents or relatives are showing them an anecdote or a typewriter letter from back in the 40s or 30s, it doesn't have to go missing. It can be recorded history, and someone can actually utilize it to uncover it, use it as some sort of a source for their research, whatnot. And this is kind of what I would like to start doing with with the technology that we already have. And the best part is, for me personally, is that we have a mechanism in place to incentivize people to do this. So we can basically reward people for going around and collecting different information, taking photos of different things. So I can say, hey, to whoever, our users of say 100,000 users, and tell them, hey, go to your attics, find if there are any historical documents in there that obviously you can share. Take a photo of it and you'll be incentivized for it. So this obviously benefits people who seemingly may not even be interested in it, but we are still able to gather, crowdsource a lot of information. And just imagine if even say 1,000, 10,000 people from each continent, each region does this, just how much data that we will have, how much access to more information in our own histories that we will have. And this is, I think, a very exciting future that I would love to be a part of creating. And especially after listening to Dr. Kwong and Billy, it kind of gave me this courage to think that, oh wow, there are other people who are doing fantastic work in a very similar field, and it would be great to just make this a much bigger thing and a much bigger project where more people can even contribute to it. So again, just to recap, what we're aiming to do here is to essentially build a database of all these different artifacts or texts or documents, whatever it is, and bring them together and maybe eventually even find a way where it's not a problem for people to maintain them and manage them. And there's a reason I mention this, because I was talking to one of the archivists at the museum, and they mentioned a very interesting point, and it's that, first of all, they have limitations on who offers them all these different pieces of information. Typically, it's very prominent families or history buffs, history enthusiasts who come in and actively provide them information. And I was telling them about my story, which I shared with all of you, how we're not my grandparents or my family isn't necessarily a prominent family, but there was just so much things in my grandparents' house, artifacts, anecdotes, letters, photos, all from the 30s, 40s, 50s, and luckily, as I mentioned, my grandfather loved to write about it, so there's some written history on it. But I can imagine there's a lot more people with very similar situations where it's just untouched, or maybe even eroding off in their attics. So the problem with the current model is that it's very, first of all, expensive to maintain all of this. Space constraint, privacy constraints, cost funding. Museums always have these issues. Who's going to fund it? And even if there are grants and organizations funding it, it's very short term. And I just felt like it doesn't have to be upon a single institution, museum, to help preserve these things. It can be all of our collective responsibilities, and it doesn't even have to feel like a responsibility. We can all be incentivized to do so. So maybe we'll get a little credit or points or whatever it is for participating and preserving whatever access to, little bit of access to history that we all have individually. So in the future, not the future, I mean, I'm going to start working on using the existing technology that we have is to start crowdsourcing all of this. So, if I had this 10, 15 years ago, I would, every time I go to my grandparents' house, I would take a photo of all those little photos or anecdotes, and it's just all getting recorded. That's it. And then later on, who uses that for what research or what digital museum? That's up to everyone else. But let's first start keeping a record on all of this, because it's extremely important that we pass on all of these information to the upcoming future generation as well. And just to kind of wrap this up, the personal anecdote that I was talking about is, although my grandparents had a lot of different objects, different photos, just so much rich cultural, historical context in their houses. Unfortunately, while they were alive, they were hit by 2 big floods in South India, and all washed away, all of it. And I regret it a bit now because at the time I didn't realize how much it meant to my grandparents because smartphones came much after I was born, but, it didn't really hit me as much at the time. And now that, they're not here with me, I think it hits me a lot more because for them, that's a piece of their history. That's a piece of the life or the lives that they led, that they took joy in sharing with their grandkids or whoever came visiting to them. And when the last floods happened in 2015, they were devastated. And it's one thing to see your grandparents in their 80s just go through something like a flood. Like they shouldn't be going through any hardship at this point, right? Just enjoy your retired life and live happily. But to see them go through all of this was very devastating for myself as a family member. And this, I think, sparked that hidden passion in me to first really rediscover, all the different heritage, all the different cultural aspects which I had not familiarized myself with. And second, to see how I can connect my work with preserving of all of these different historical things. So luckily, some things, my family tried to protect it by putting it through chemical solutions and so on. But, hopefully we go through a future where we don't have to, take a big hit on losing all of these historical aspects. And I believe that, cutting edge technology like Web3, blockchain, it can be as simple as just taking a photograph. That's all it takes, and it's there forever for anyone to see, for anyone to access. And I think that's going to be a very important aspect for us going in the future.
So thank you for that. At this point, I'm going to bring the other 2 speakers back to the stage, and let's have a quick discussions and open the floor for Q&A. So one thing, while they're making their way up right here, and there are 2 speakers, and let's go back to the poster, if I can have Hugo, if you can put the poster back, please have a seat. No worry. One thing I picked up is at the beginning, I make the introductions. Dr. Kwong uses cutting edge technology, and then he point out it wasn't really cutting edge. Aerial photography, invented 60 years, some even further up, and then Ani talked about snapping and actually having that picture just uploaded somewhere, but it's being able to use it, a new concept of what contribute to earn or whatever that flavor of the month for the Web3 folks, exercise to earn, play to earn, and different things now is on this one. So number one, is there really any actual cutting edge technology at all? Maybe I'll start with you 2 that were involved.
As a historian, I never actually have to sell my things as cutting edge. So, but since you asked, the only thing that involves innovation is not inventing something. We're still using something. But in terms of historical research, it's kind of new. Is that the AI enhanced model workflow we just mentioned? So the process of optical character recognition, the conversion of the historical data into GIS compatible part. But as I said, it's still human centered. Yeah.
Without that part of the technology, how much longer or how much more investment you would have to do the projects you have? And same question to Billy. Without that, how much did it save you, or would it be even not possible to have a project like that at all?
Oh, well, I write every single caption myself. I take great pride in it. And I don't read anything that nobody could be bothered to write. What are the AIs going to do? Show each other? No, it's like that's not the point of it. The point is the human at the center.
Fantastic.
But at the same time, when we talk about saving time and resources, that's for my case, you save around 60%, but you won't be. There is no saying that without this is not possible. No. Everything is possible. Yeah, if you have enough dedication and a big team,
Right.
that's possible.
You guys also talk about funding. So saving 60%, that's, in your particular
Time
case,
and
that is
time.
significant. Fantastic. Billy, anything to add to about technology?
It did help translate a bulk of data. Like we had an Excel spreadsheet, but it was rough. Like Mart will be able to take us through this, but in the end, we had to hire a human to go through it and fix it. And in the end, what the AI had come up with was like either it couldn't understand Cantonese, or it just got things completely wrong. In the end, a human had to do it.
Ani, if could you share the mic real quick? Again, cutting technology, is that really cutting edge technology? Or this is just plain old technology reused in a different way? But you did mention about blockchains and Web3, so talk us through about that part, how it actually helped or will help.
I think not yet,
Not
to
yet,
be
okay.
honest. But I think it's very important to note that technology is always work in progress. It's only when we look back that we realize how much progress that we've actually made. So, for example, it's been almost 20 years since the first iPhone was released. And that's crazy to me, because I remember just like yesterday when the first iPhone was being released. So we don't realize how much progress that we're making, only when we look back. Now, so the second part was?
Well, how much it enables you or will enable your projects going forward?
I think, especially this is true with something like blockchain, because I think a lot of times, and I'm in the industry, so I know this, is a lot of times people say they're using blockchain for something that really doesn't require blockchain. We have real life anecdotes from Dr. Kwong and Billy talking about how the AI couldn't even understand Cantonese. So I think it's a good balance, but what Dr. Kwong was saying about how it saved 60% of your time. So I think we have to know where to pick and choose and what to utilize it for, but I don't buy the fact that we can completely rely on some technology to suddenly solve all of our problems. I think there has to be a human touch to it. And that's kind of what we're doing now as well, right? I mean, even with our technology, you can't just have the materials there. You need someone to take a photo of it. So it's a collaboration.
I know earlier we had a quick kind of conference and did not get a chance to sync up. Now you actually saw Annie's presentation, or a short one, but his intent and his objective, is that doable based on what you two know about the community, Indian community in Hong Kong, where there are a lot of number one, is there a missing gap, missing pieces? And is that doable to actually crowdsource that and fill the gap of that?
Can I do an AOB here?
Yeah,
Or
please.
do we have to strictly follow the agenda?
No,
Yeah,
please,
sorry.
please.
Because I have a question for the audience, because we will sort of expect more interaction from the audience. I'm sure you have questions to ask. There's one thing I would like to ask first. Did any one of you visited gulo.com? Gulo.com. Gulo.com. Probably you all did. Yes. So speaking of, I sorry for not using the catchwords, because call me old-fashioned. So gathering sources, historical sources, as a historian, gathering primary sources from the public has been, it has been there since people try to write history. So I think whatever technology you use, the intent is the same. There is always a drive from since more than 100 years, moving away from the big man's history to a more social approach, day-to-day approach to the people's lives and the diversity of human experience. Just like, for example, in my map, I actually have a layer called Faces of War. We deliberately added people from different backgrounds, Indians included, of course, to the maps in order to show the diversity of human experience. Where are these sources come from? Absolutely, the people around us. There are always people who had people, relatives who experienced the war. Just for an example, I had my best friend is actually, we studied in the same secondary school. We know each other for more than 20 years. It was only 3-4 years ago, I know that his grandfather was actually one of the earliest member of a British special force who fought in Burma. He is a Hong Kong Chinese. He was actually quite good at sports, but I didn't realize he was actually that good, okay? Special forces descendant. Now he's always pretend he's actually elite or some sort. So you always know people who had some sort of historical connections and so on. So there are always intents or among the historians in my field to try to collect primary sources from the public. So whether this is doable or not, I can only say this has been what people are doing. Say, for example, like Google.com. I'm sure some of you have already contributed in it. And it's extremely important as a source and extremely important as a platform. So what we have been doing, in fact, I shared all the data with David Dallas, the Google.com's owner. And he shared some of his data with us as well. So we have a very happy exchange of data. So I'm sure any attempts to collect more sources are good, as long as we have certain thresholds concerning authenticity, availability, provenance, or all these things sorted. Yeah. So that's why the traditional archives are still relevant, because they ensure those stuff. So yeah, I can't really categorically comment yes or no, but that's, as a historian, that's what I would think of. Yeah.
Very, very professional academics answer.
How can I follow?
Let's open the
Yes.
questions to the floor, and so we got one hand right there, and anyone from here, so we can. Okay,
I want to know about your wartime stories.
So Hugo, do we have another mic? If not, I'll hand mine. The lady right here in the center, first one. Anyone? Any questions from this side later? No. Okay, please.
Yes. Thank you very much. I have a question about gold signs. We all know that Hong Kong changed very quickly because of commercial activities, and buildings get demolished all the time. So do you think the gold signs can be saved, and will they be saved? And if they are saved, is it only in terms of like photo archive or virtual library, or can they actually be physically saved, either on-site or in a storage, for example? And for example, I remember going to a local tour in Wan Chai, and the tour guide showed us that on that wall, there's actually a sign, and the calligrapher was actually one of the top 4 Chinese calligraphers of the Qing dynasty, right? So it's like, wow, but do people know about it? Do they care about it? How can it be saved? Yeah.
Well, realistically, most of them are going to go. To be honest, like most of the records that Ben and I have made, that is likely to be the last record. And we are building this on shifting sand. Like that's the foundation, and that's why it's currently so urgent for us. For instance, in Kowloon City, we spent the past 6 months making a walking tour of ghost signs in Kowloon City, and we went back perhaps at the 3-month mark, and an entire block had been raised, and that included perhaps a dozen ghost signs. So that was it. It's just impractical to save some of these because they're on the wall. You would need to cut out a section of building, and at the moment, ghost signs have absolutely no sort of protection at all, and they're not recognized as anything. I was very surprised when I found that nobody was really considering them as anything before we did, because I thought for sure something so interesting would be documented. So they just don't, they're not very glamorous. They're not like neon. I mean, and look at neon. Neon got destroyed, and neon is and they're at M+. But even they went. So even if that goes, then I don't think that some indistinct painted signs on walls are going to attract much attention, which is why we feel it's so important to do this work. A few of the signs, perhaps, the ones that can be taken off the walls, those have been preserved. I mentioned very briefly Ken and Kevin from Street Sign HK, and they did some good work in Yuman Square in Kwun Tong before that was torn down for a huge development. So they managed to keep quite a few signs from that. But it's very difficult. Like I think we'll lose many of the physical expressions of these signs, and it'll have to be a written account and a photographic account. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, but can I chip in a bit before the next question? Because what Billy did actually helped a lot in pushing, maybe if we are lucky, the government's attention, because AMO can assign certain points at points of interest, just like boundary stone, marker stone. So in terms of status, those gold signs might be able to be assigned with that, because you did one very important thing, which is to trace the creator of those people and assign certain cultural importance of those people and their work in Hong Kong history and culture. So it's basically you create a case for the intangible cultural heritage of those signs and the fonts and the calligraphers and their calligraphies. And then once that was established, perhaps things can be moved a bit. So you actually helped us a lot, because from my experience of working with wartime structures, most of them, 99% of them are gone. So you are very fortunately saving the post-war first phase of redevelopment for us, which is very important because, as you said, the redevelopment is very quick. So they will be gone soon. So we lost one chance. Now we maybe have some chance to save another layer.
Yes. Yeah. And you're absolutely right about these calligraphers. There are some very prominent ones on the walls because people hire them because they're either famous or they're known to be lucky for the business. Those are the ones that tend to be signed. But calligraphy already is like kind of a niche. You know, like you don't tend to get many superstar like calligraphers. However, if you were to look into it, look at some of these names, you would find them, you know, in the collections of the Museum of Art and institutions like that. Like I think that it would be important to recognize the work of such people. But on top of that, you know, aside from fine art calligraphers, I think that we also need to start recognizing commercial calligraphers, because a lot of the time, we tend to look down on commercial sign writing calligraphy because it doesn't match the ideals of fine art calligraphy. And this is not because the calligrapher is necessarily bad or workmanlike. It is because the sign maker has a different priority, and that is legibility. So they almost have the considerations of a graphic designer. And then they also have considerations like durability of the sign. So sometimes these signs are not just painted on, they're translated into metal or wood or acrylic or something like that. So sometimes they will actually change the script a bit so that certain strokes are together, so that rather than having a small piece just on its own that's likely to fall off the wall, they have a larger piece which is likely to stick better. So I think that it's important to recognize commercial sign writing, commercial calligraphy as a category in its own right. And if you look at the work of a man named Wesley Wong, who did a show last year, also funded by the Lord Wilson Heritage Trust, as our project is, called City, what is it? Like Ink City, I think it is. He actually celebrates commercial calligraphers. In particular, one whose name is Ao Gin Gong, and he did a lot of calligraphy, which we see in Shengwan.
Fantastic. Not the answer we're hoping for. We are kind of race against time. If you want to appreciate those, the physical sign of it. And unfortunately, the government, I'm not sure what the pecking order and the priority on that list of preserving it and actually designating as a not only point of interest, but act on it, preserving anything. But this is a group who's passionate about it. Any other questions? So we see a hand right over there, if we can get that. And in the interest of time, any other people would have questions, I'll get the mic ready so we can ask. Please.
So I have a question for primarily Billy and Annie. So I know that both of you, at least originally as well, you, Billy, didn't really come from a sort of arts and cultural background. And Annie, you're still working kind of as a tech guy. So my question is, considering how both of you are now very much involved in sort of cultural preservation and so on, but in Hong Kong, that's generally not the trend, which probably is why there are so many ghost signs in the first place. I know that probably all of us in the room consider this very important, but if the general sort of cultural zeitgeist here is to consider these things unimportant and to instead consider sort of more traditional routes that both of you have or are working in more important, then how do we actually make this something that people would care about? I guess that's the question. Because all these things, heritage preservation, these narratives, are all very important, but as you would know, most people in Hong Kong, probably a lot of people in Asia by extension, don't really care. And I think that's really the main thing that's keeping this stuff from being sort of thought about more. So is there a solution or just any comments towards that?
So you're asking me, Cyril, like, how would I make people care?
In a way, yeah, because like you originally came from more of a legal background, right? But so there is some really important stuff here, but a lot of people, because for instance, like so I mainly teach like secondary school, and I try to make my students care more about sort of history and culture and whatnot, but they'll just say to me, "Well, I don't earn any money." Yesterday, one of my students asked me, because we were discussing sort of the use of public funds and resources, and I said, well, arts and history needs money, and he just immediately responded, why does arts and culture need money? Because he was literally unaware that there needs to be resources to do these things, like they're legitimately unaware. So how do we, I guess, sort of from a broader perspective, this stuff is so important, how do we get other people to think it's important?
Yes.
Right?
I mean, like, institutions like M+ even find it difficult to explain to people why they should be paying to see art or why they should be supporting it. There is a general, speaking with people who are essentially trying to get people to be patrons of M+, the attitude generally is like, oh, this is a wealthy person's interest, but it is not. It is in everybody's interest to have a rich cultural environment. How does one make somebody care about it? Well, unfortunately, people are very self-centered and they only care if it has something to do with them. And so one must make it incredibly relevant to the person's life. You basically show them, very obviously, if possible, how is this relevant to you, and why does this concern you? So, for instance, like that is why I'm so keen on ghost signs, because this is the culture of everyday life, and it does very much involve you. That is, like you will engage with this every single day, and that's a very easy inroad into making somebody care. Yes, Ben.
And if I can add to that, part of it is engagement and part of that is engagement and accessibility. And that's one of the beautiful things about ghost signs is that it's not in a museum, it's out in the streets. And so as everyone leaves here tonight, if you wanted to walk down the big staircase to the right of this building, or left, depending on where you're walking out, if you go to the bottom, there's a ghost sign sitting at the bottom. For the old water department, it's a sign there. If you go across the street down Lower Albert, is the old Central Hospital. That's a ghost sign as well. And so there's an opportunity to engage with it, and this is what we're endeavoring to do with our web app and the type of outreach we're doing, is to say, anyone can see it. You don't need to go to a museum, you don't need to go into a special place, you can just walk down the street and engage with these things outside your own front door.
Yes, the city is the museum, which I think a lot of people have failed to understand in the past, especially before we had a world-class institution such as M+. I think that it was quite common and arrogant for people to say that Hong Kong was a cultural wasteland simply because we didn't have a museum like that, except that they were blind to the fact that the entire city around them was a spectacle and a beautiful piece of culture. I mean, I've said it before, but if you walk around and you ignore things happening that are alive around you, then you really are living life with no understanding whatsoever of anything. You walk past bamboo scaffolding and you don't think that's remarkable. You walk past people doing lion dancing in parades, you don't think that's remarkable. And then I want to shake you and say, what's wrong with you?
Yeah, if I can chip in one short comment, is that my experience of doing talks in secondary schools, well, I have been invited to many places to do talks about Second World War. The teachers love me to do Second World War talks, maybe because I can still make jokes about a very bad situation. But the thing is, still, I cannot engage them. The students would usually just treat it as a far-flung affair, so it's not really related to them. But when I talk about what happened at the Second World War at their school, where many of them claimed themselves to be headquarters of the Japanese military police, there were lots of execution took place and there were ghosts in their school campus, they listened. So that's the only entry point of those stories. And now with the GIS, I can very safely and assuredly tell them many of those ghost stories are true. Enjoy your school life. Yeah.
I sometimes get the inverse of that when people realize the ghost signs don't involve actual ghosts, and then they're disappointed.
Maybe they do involve actual ghosts, and you're yet to discover that part. But I mean, really not much to add after what Billy and Dr. Kwong said. And from my perspective, it's just one word: you got to make it sexy. And you know, I think there was a time when, and Billy talked about neons, for example, and people have a way of creating a new culture through aesthetics, through whatever people find interesting. And obviously, you know, Instagram, TikTok has been pivotal in that. And I have a, you know, personally, I really related when Billy talked about how Hong Kong as a city is a museum. And I think Tokyo is, where I'm from, is very similar as well. There's a lot you can learn by you know, taking a walk through the more lesser known streets, whereas typically people only go to the I guess the Lang Kwai Fong equivalent of Tokyo, right? You only go to where you see the hype around. But there's just so much to learn around it, and I think more people are visiting those places, and that is also, you know, whether it's for the good or bad, but it's through all this social media, all the hype up, you know, people talking about it. So I think it's just a matter of the right people presenting it in the right way for all these, you know, the next generation or whoever it is, right? And as Billy again said, when it's relevant to you, you become more involved with it. And I love Dr. Kwong's story of, you know, I remember such an incident where people would talk about that, and you know, of course, we'd be interested if we found out that our own school used to be, I don't know, a graveyard, for example, right? It's very fascinating when you're a student. So I think it's having a personal relation, and there's also other avenues you can take. For example, with our app, the avenue that we're taking is incentivization. So what we're saying is whether you're interested or not, if you do this, you're going to get paid. So yeah, I mean, not ideal for everything. You know, a lot of times you want people to actually be interested, but to get people, you know, moving and start getting involved, there are different ways to go about it.
Okay, we have 2 questions here.
Hi, really appreciate this talk. I just want to respond to that gentleman about why we're not interested in a lot of Hong Kong culture. And then we need to be money-oriented on all kinds of projects. But I think if we live in Hong Kong is such a special place. It's not just Chinese, but it's a melting pot of the British, the Indians, the all kinds of nationality, and they found home here. And I think it's not just the teacher's responsibility. It's the parents' responsibility that they should start be interested in the culture and the history of Hong Kong. Hong Kong is not just a Chinese place. I think it's more diversified than New York. I think Hong Kong has a very special history background, and we should be proud of it as Hong Kong people. And we don't need to be money-orientated to be interested in any project. I think it's our parents and as being a Hong Kong person, responsible to dig out our history and perceive our culture, and then let the whole world knows how good we are. Not just people like you who, using your own time and money to teach us and tell us all these beautiful stories. And it's like a wake-up call, as you said, as the lady said. Commercial people, especially, land developers, they have no shame in knocking out all these buildings and our historical, sites. But as Hong Kong people, I think we should be responsible to preserve as much as possible, even by photos, by story, telling our children and even my students, to make Hong Kong more beautiful. Otherwise, it's a lost paradise. And I think there's nowhere in the world which is better than Hong Kong, because we've been living in many other countries. And I just find we are so lucky and so blessed living in Hong Kong, especially seeing all these turmoils in America, in Middle East, in Gaza, in England. Hong Kong is so beautiful and safe, and we're very blessed. So it's our responsibility to teach our next generation how good we are. So to start with, we have to study our history and be proud of our culture first.
Thank you. Beautiful, beautiful response and comment. Thank you. We have enough time for one more. So after this, if there's anyone want to ask question or final comment, please do.
Okay,
But
I'll
anyway,
make
do
this a
go ahead.
quick
I'm
one.
saying after you, there's one more.
I'll make this a real quick one. Just a quick question for Billy. Have you ever talked with tourism board about your project?
Yes, everybody asks if we would talk about tourism board. I think that the important thing would be to lay everything out and have that very finessed before going to the tourism board. I don't think that we can reasonably rely on the tourism board to do anything for us. Like we would have to still do the heavy lifting. Certainly, once we are ready, we would be very happy to talk to them.
Because I'm just thinking of any like tourism value as a way of maybe giving second thought as not to demolish these things. Recently, when you watch YouTube, people were crying about, in LA when they were just crying that they said, the fire, how their whole family's history was in their house and it was totally destroyed. And then Annie was talking about your grandparents' history destroyed by flood. To this F&F, flood and fire. Everything is fleeting, like in the Japanese philosophy. This is really against our really pragmatic value system in Hong Kong. But if we can post some of your attractive photograph in Xiaohongshu, so people start coming around, taking pictures and publicizing for you, of all these valuable record of the intersection of Hong Kong in history. So,
Yes, it's
Great.
wonderful. I mean, we can see there's somebody interested in everything, and we can see this in various trends, and they don't have to be highbrow. We don't have to look down on what people find particularly interesting. Yes, okay. So visitors from the mainland like McDonald Road because it sounds like McDonald's. Okay, fine. You go do that. That makes you happy. But you know what? Like from a tourism perspective, those people are going to, if they're going to go there, while they're going there, they're going to need to spend money to get there. When they get there, they're probably going to get hungry or thirsty, and they're going to need to buy something. So yeah, all of it is valuable, and all of it is worth thinking about. There's no sense in being elitist about it.
Fantastic. Anyone? We have time for one more question. I'm glad.
Could I ask Dr. Kwong? Is there any accessible store of oral histories from ordinary Hong Kongers from the 1940s during the war or just after the war? Is there anything that's accessible to the layman?
There are actually many. So
Right.
first of all, you have the Hong Kong Memory Project. Hong Kong Memory Project run by the Professor Elizabeth Sin from Hong Kong U. She spent lots of time building a database about ordinary Hong Kong people. So she spent lots of time doing oral history of just normal people. And the sound records and the transcripts are there at Hong Kong Memory Project's website. They are fairly accessible, but I'm not sure whether they are translated into other languages. Many of them are, well, understandably in Chinese. But for the English, the Hong Kong Heritage Project of the CLP actually has the largest collection of oral histories of Hong Kong Chinese or expatriates or people who are in Hong Kong for many generations who can use both languages. So the depository is actually accessible, open to the public. You can go there, check with the archivist, you see, and they have an online searchable engine. So it's very accessible as well. The third one would be Hong Kong Museum of History. And in fact, but it was fairly closed. Yeah, I mean the archive. And the fourth one would be the Imperial War Museum. They have a very extensive oral history collection of those who participated in the Second World War in Hong Kong. And of course, they mainly focus on the prisoners of war experience and the Stanley internment, understandably. But that's why I started the GIS though. When I was listening to those transcripts, the recordings, whenever those interviewed try to explain in detail the locality, the locations, the interviewers stopped them, interrupted them as if those geographical informations are irrelevant to the main story the interviewers are focused on. So yeah, that's why when I was listening to those recordings, I always get mad when there's an old man saying that when I was in the Wong Lai Chung Gap, and then suddenly the interviewer would say, how about discriminations? I was like, come on. So that kind of stuff. So oral histories, they are good. But nowadays, if we can use our geographic information to really prop that up, so that might be better. Yeah, thank you.
Well, that's the time we have for tonight, but the journey continues, the conversation continues, and the projects definitely continues. And so we hope to not only see you again, but we'll hope to invite you guys back and if there are any new updates. So with that, let's give a big hands of applause for the speakers. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And with that, the club has a token of appreciations for you guys. Each get a bag and a cup of the FCC cup and the FCC bag. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
So,
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
right. Let's look at the photo and
okay.
take an official photo and talk about historic moments.
I just broke my cup, so thank you very much for that.
Yeah.